Hello, James. We are back.
We are back, and we are back after we've gone live with this project.
Yeah, this is our first recording since we launched the Open to Work podcast and went live with our first 5-6 episodes. I mean, how do you feel? You released the baby into the open, and people can see it and read it and feel it.
Well, it turns out that people are listening, so thank you for not just listening for our first week, but for coming back and for coming back in greater numbers for weeks 2 and weeks 3 and weeks 4. We've had thousands of you download our podcast.
I mean, the reception has really been incredible. I was saying to James just before we started recording, but I'll be going to events and even ones where I know people only socially, and they'll come up to me and say, "Oh, I've been listening to your podcast. Thank you for giving those tips. It was really helpful." And I've been getting private messages on LinkedIn, thanking us for what we're doing. And I think when we set up when we had this idea, we had this goal of we want to help people. That's what the core of what this is can we help people get their next jobs, and are we going to produce valuable and interesting content? And it feels like the feedback so far, and long may it continue, has been yes, which has just been so great to see.
Yeah, we hoped people would listen, and they are. So I guess we should continue.
But speaking of people listening, we realized after a few episodes, you might notice that we started asking people to write in with their questions, their input, and it took us a few episodes to work out that we should ask people to interact with us, but we finally got there. And so this kind of episode is thank you for everyone for listening so far. We've really appreciated your time, but also we're here to answer your questions, and we want to respond to a few of the awesome ones that came through. Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all. My first one comes from a gentleman named Gregory, and he's said, "Thank you, James and Matt, for all of your great content." So here's the question. With a successful career so far, including more than 20 years of experience, many of these which are now at the executive level, I've never finished my bachelor's degree, and I'm worried that these are hurting my current job search. Am I getting booted from the ATS in round 1, even though I have a great experience and can demonstrate I've knew the job? Am I getting limited by the fact that I haven't done my degree, and should I return to the university to complete it?
This is a great
James,
question.
what do you think?
This is a great question. It's one of those that I have to answer like a lawyer and say, it depends. It depends on where you are, and it depends on where you're applying to. I'm going to give an answer for the United States, and then you should give an answer for Europe. In the United States, rightly or wrongly, it is lawful to use education as both a qualifier and a line in the sand for whether someone is an applicant or a candidate. So you can say that a job requires a bachelor's degree. And if you don't have a bachelor's degree, you are not qualified for the job. It's a binary yes or no thing. Now, there is an increasing movement, which is a really good thing, that is moving away from what's been termed the paper ceiling, and the newer way of thinking that's been embraced by the more forward-thinking corporations is that requiring a degree is one of the unintended consequences, is helping to perpetuate systemic and structural inequity. And so many organizations are now moving away from a hard line in the sand, and you will see now in job descriptions often either a bachelor's degree or 4 or 5 years equivalent experience as an
Mhm.
alternate. Where it gets tricky is other legislation in the US hasn't necessarily kept pace. And so, if it is a large corporation that does a lot of immigration work, issues a lot of visas, it can get really tricky because the visa legislation is often still tied to education levels. And so, whilst Corporation A might be really forward thinking and wanting to move away from the paper ceiling and requiring a degree, they might still be compelled to require degrees because they need it to be able to justify the visas that they issue to international candidates. So it's very much in flux here in the US. But
Mm.
if you see bachelor's degree required and nothing else, then yes, it is required. And if you
Yeah.
don't have one, you will not be considered as a candidate. And if you see degree or equivalent, then that's the gray area. But unfortunately, in the US, I would say 7 times out of 10, the paper ceiling still exists, which is incredibly frustrating. And I believe it does perpetuate structural and systemic inequity. And that's why I'm glad that we're moving away from it, but it's a slow moving
Yeah.
thing.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that all the data indicates that setting having like the bachelor's of education or some sort of university degree has no relevance for someone's ability to be able to do the job. And Google did a great in Laszlo Bock's work rules pointed to the that post 3 years of being in work, there is no correlation between whether you have a degree and your and the quality of the work that you're delivering. So I think it's like for businesses out there that are listening, or TA or people leaders out there that are listening, this is something that we should actively kind of move away from, and towards kind of inverted commas skills based hiring, is much more the trend. I think to respond to Gregory like more directly, and you know, it's possible. Yeah, it's possible, but it's not necessarily likely. Like even within organisations where they're saying you are required to have a bachelor's or a university degree, even in those circumstances, James, they could say that. I've seen many circumstances where they say that on the job description, but the reality is the recruiter's never looking at it, the hiring manager's never looking at it, and you can, you know, whether you have it in your CV or not, it doesn't really make a difference. And I think that is happening more often than not. At the moment, in, you know, I like to, maybe that's just my wishful thinking, but I do feel like it's happening. That is happening now.
In Europe, maybe, but in the US, it's always checked. And I can't remember the exact stat. It's either 92 or 97% of hiring processes in the US use some form of background verification. And the background verification includes education verification. So
Yeah.
if a job in the United States says requires a bachelor's degree, you can almost certainly guarantee that then they will verify whether you have the bachelor's degree as part of your onboarding process.
But,
And unfortunately, I have been involved in processes multiple times here in the United States where we have had to withdraw offers when
mm,
someone has indicated on their application that they have a bachelor's degree. And then when we come to do the background verification, it turns out that they don't. And even if
mm,
someone's 20 years into their career and it's
wow.
irrelevant at that point, because they said that they had it
Yeah.
and they don't, then it's an automatic withdrawal of the offer.
That is such a. I'm genuinely a bit surprised by that, because I wrote a response to Gregory. Gregory, please write in when you see this, and let us know where you are around the world, because it does. You know, in my experience in the UK, predominantly, if it's like you don't look at it, and that's been my experience personally, perhaps. And I know that I've had conversations with hiring managers, and it is more relevant, I think, in continental Europe for what it's worth than it is in the UK potentially. But maybe that's just a function of the access to education systems and stuff like that here. But where I would say it is relevant, and I would say this is relevant in most countries, is going to be in civil service. if they are asking you to have a certain level of qualification in civil service, it will be a requirement that you could easily get screened out of. And I think that's relevant in the US and in the UK. How this function is working in the back end is probably, it could be that when you're applying, you are filling out a form or similar, depending on the size of the enterprise, and that in that you're entering university degree and what university you went to, and it could be automatically screening you out if you put that you don't have the right level of qualification there. As if you're getting that sense where you're getting these these very, very quick responses to your application, it could be that's happening, but the reality, what's more likely is they're going through your CV manually and checking potentially as well, and then making sure that it's one of the boxes that the recruiters will be ticking as they go through your CV.
Unless it's happening in the US, and then you can be, again, lawfully, automatically rejected based on the fact that you don't, on your minimum education requirements. So it's
so what's like, if he's based in the US, then he said he's got a successful kind of career, 20 years and now as an executive. So you'd assume that this hasn't limited him to date. So why do you think it's then changed for Gregory, taking him as a hypothetical?
I cannot answer without knowing who this person is and their career journey. But if someone has been working, if this is in the US, if someone has been working in smaller businesses and is now applying to larger organizations that might have more rigorous or structured processes, I can't begin to speculate, but it is just a standard thing here in the US that the degree or lack of is a cutoff, and depending on who you ask, they will give you different reasons for why that is. But the prohibitively high cost of education, a degree now can cost you $200,000 in the United States, serves as a significant barrier to entry into professional jobs. And the unintended or intended consequence of that is that it disproportionately impacts marginalized folks.
Yeah,
it's kind of ugly. So the truth.
I think in summary, then, to you, Gregory, is it's possible. Unfortunately, especially if you're based in the US, and even if you're based in the UK and continental Europe, that your lack of a university education is screening you out, especially if they put it down as a requirement rather than as a nice to have. We want to live in a world where it doesn't, and where it's not, and where we have more progressive hiring practices that are not exclusive like this. But that, in many circumstances, is not the case. So, something for you to reflect on. Obviously, we don't have the answers here. All we can provide is a perspective based on our experience and knowledge, and hopefully that's useful in finding your next opportunity, and best of luck. James, tell us about our American sponsor.
Many of the legacy ATS products don't use AI in any meaningful way, which is what is so innovative about mojohire.ai. It is an overlay that you can add to your existing ATS that helps you better discover candidates that are already there and reduces discovery time by up to 90%. Their comparative AI tool is a real game changer, and you can learn more at mojohire.ai.
So let's move on to Amy. So hi, James and Matthew. Really love your podcast, gaining valuable insights from each episode. A lot of your discussions have focused on large companies and their recruiting strategies, but I'm particularly interested in learning about smaller companies and their approach to hiring. I'm particularly interested to learn how smaller companies might handle recruiting, screening, hiring processes, and especially those even without an in-house recruiter or a single person responsible for sourcing new hires. Thanks a lot, Amy.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So my takeaway on this is, what is going to be the experience of maybe like a sub 20-person business or a sub 50-person business versus, the difference of kind of going through a process for a company that has 10,000 or, multiples of thousands of people. Like even a scenario where you don't have there's not even a recruiter in place yet because the business is so small. How do we expect those sort of interview processes or recruiting processes to look and feel different?
It depends, right? It depends on the person running the company. If it's a sub 20 person company, it's basically a personal fiefdom at that point, and it depends on where they worked before. Some founders are straight out of college. Some founders never even went to college. They just have a great idea at 17 and found a company and get funding and start to build it. Some founders, however, spend a decade working in corporate America or Silicon Valley and then start a company. So it depends on what their experience is, right? If someone's come out of a Google or an Apple and they're a first-time founder, you might see an actually quite rigorous process, even though it's a 10-person company. Or, if someone has never been an employee before and they're a serial entrepreneur or a first-time entrepreneur, you might meet them for a coffee in a Starbucks. It's impossible to say because it's so situational.
Yeah, and I think let's try and kind of imagine a couple of the more kind of classic scenarios, perhaps. So I guess my kind of guess is that especially for like a sub 50-person recruiter organization, or even a sub 20-person organization that's not growing rapidly, that's growing incrementally, they're probably going to be using an external recruiting agency, or maybe they've kind of got a founder that's put a job out online, is kind of fielding it all themselves. But that top end of that funnel, the kind of areas where they're going to struggle is managing the candidates, and also potentially even defining what they're going to be looking for in the first place. Like they're going to be changing, so like the businesses is going to be changing so much, and there's going to be so much ambiguity that really they're going to be looking for someone to come in and help guide them through that stage that they're going through and help answer some of those questions. So with that logic, you're probably going to be having a much more consultative and casual interviewing process. One that is asking for your input and offering a perspective, and how would you deal with this scenario and that scenario, because they want to see whether or not you'd be able to work out, what their job could be, like what your job could be, because there's a level of ambiguity which they need to kind of see whether or not you can deal with. And you'll probably find that once you get in, everything's going to change again. So I think if I was to guide you on like preparing for a job interview with a small business, it's try and build an authentic connection as you would do with anyone. But also, it's going to be a consultation process, I think, almost more than any other type of recruiting process you could go through, because they genuinely may not know exactly what it is that A, you do, B, this role could do, and see what this role is going to deliver for the business, because that's what you're here to build and go through that process with them. And I think that's sometimes my favorite type of interviewing, because you get to really get into a back and forth and develop a real relationship with people. What do you reckon? Does that resonate with you?
I almost don't want to speculate because, again, it could be a million different things depending on the founder,
Maybe I'm just more comfortable randomly offering my perspective and speculating wildly. Because the other thing I was going to say on this when I read this question is that, like, it's probably going to be a lot. My experience working with founders, and I still work with founders every day, and I've recruited with founders quite recently, is that they are a lot more gut oriented and a lot more like relationship oriented. They really want to know that they can get along with this person, and that's a really big part of the process for them, is like a cultural and values alignment, this piece. And I think you'll see that in any sort of stage of any sort of stage of business, but especially at the founder level, that relationship you can build with them really quickly is going to be vital. Whenever there's a founder, I think in a business, especially at that size, and especially when you're interviewing the founder, they want to know that you're going to be able to carry that culture torch forward. So hopefully that helps as well.
I think I would answer it slightly differently and say it's even more critical if you're thinking about going to work in that type of environment where there is a much higher degree of ambiguity, there are fewer guardrails, and everything is much more relationship driven, that it's just as important for you to make sure that the potential fit with you and that founder is going to work in the medium term, because there won't be an HR department. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that we're going to have an episode on this soon. But how you evaluate them is going to be so important, because if you can't, how do you make decisions? How do you debate? How do you offer your perspective and have a voice in that business and navigate that effectively so you can have a proper contribution? Like that's all really going to be really important, I think, when you're interviewing with a founder. Okay. I think themes, by the way, so far I'm getting, and I think we wrote about this recently, is it depends. Is we're not really going to be dealing in absolutes when you ask these questions, and so when you do write in, like obviously give us as much context as you possibly can, and I'll try and paraphrase as much as possible. But yeah, we'll try and help as much as we possibly can. Give the scenarios that you're working through.
Well, also, I think it's important to say that so often it does depend. It's it's not us being obtuse. I think we both feel very strongly that when you start talking in absolutes about very subjective subjects, that's not helpful, right? Like I'm never going to say it's always like this or you must always do that, because it depends. It really does, because it's dealing with human beings in a semi-regulated environment. Yes, there are some guardrails. Yes, there are some rules. Some people obey them. Some people don't. Some people have biases. Some people have strong opinions. And so we just don't know. We can just give you our best advice based on what we think usually happens, not what always happens.
So two quick fire questions, which we've had from multiple channels. One has been, we've talked passionately about the use of the Open to Work banner. And James, I noticed that you are not using your Open to Work banner at the moment. Would you like to share why?
Yeah, and I've spoken about this a few times now on various channels, and I will continue to offer up the data. There are two different aspects to the LinkedIn Open to Work functionality. There is the recruiter only Open to Work functionality, and then there is the green banner that everybody can see. From LinkedIn's own data, and remember, there are now 1 billion members on LinkedIn, so their data sets are enormous. They're able to draw very powerful inferences from how people are behaving on the platform. The average user that uses the recruiter only Open to Work notification typically sees a 40% uptake in mails from recruiters. Anyone that is looking for a new job, I would venture to suggest, wants to use that functionality. LinkedIn make it clear that whilst the Open to Work functionality for recruiters is visible to all recruiters, it won't be visible to recruiters at the company that you currently work at. Now, that being said, they don't give a 100% guarantee because recruiters at other companies can see it and they don't know how networked your recruiters are. But it's a pretty safe bet that even if you're in a job, you can use that and no one at your company will be able to see. The green Open to Work functionality, Open to Work banner that's visible to everybody. Again, platform wide, the average user sees a further uptick of 20% more in mails from users across the platform, not just from recruiters, but people that you used to work with, people that you're connected to. You will see on average an uptick of 20% more emails if you use that functionality. For most people, that is a good thing. You want more connections. You want more people reaching out and connecting you with opportunity, because that potentially opens more doors for you. For me, I'm super fortunate in that I have a very large following. I have 50,000 people following me on LinkedIn. And so I already receive an overwhelming amount of communication that I can barely keep up with. And if I use the green banner, I get even more, and I can't keep up with the communication, which is the only reason I don't use it. But for most people, you probably want more communication, not less, especially if you're in an active job search. But it's situational, and I'm always completely transparent about how both work and why I make the choices I make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make absolute sense, and I've seen you write about this multiple times. I think it's really important for our listener to hear again. Like, we're not dealing in absolutes. We're not going to come onto the platform and say you definitely, if you use Open to Work, you're going to get a job, or you shouldn't use it because it's XYZ reason, because there is no carte blanche rule for how you go about navigating your job search. It's totally personal. I switched mine on recently just to see what would happen, and it's resulted in a drop in my coaching contacts and the number of clients that I receive for my my coaching business. And so maybe it's not the right solution for me at this time, but if that was all I was doing, then I would definitely use it. So we will always try and give you the data that indicate that kind of will inform your decision, but we'll probably never tell you exactly what you should do other than send your CV in as a PDF. I think is our only one that we have so far as an absolute.
I will say that the clickbaity argument around open to work, in that if you use the green banner, it makes you look desperate. And a former recruiter who now runs a small staffing firm in Utah, and his business is predicated on friction in the talent market. Point number one. But this notion that you shouldn't use the green banner because it makes you look desperate. The logic in that doesn't stack up, because what he's basically saying is you will be less desirable to a hiring manager if you're not currently employed. I've been recruiting for 20 years and I don't believe that's true, but that's my opinion. That's his opinion. But let's go with his opinion for a little bit. He's saying you can't let people know that you're unemployed. So at what point during the process are you going to reveal the fact that you're unemployed? Because they're going to find out eventually. And so why would you close off that 20% uptick in opportunity out of fear that at some point that, you're going to... His argument is a hiring manager is not going to be interested if you're unemployed. Okay, so sure, you don't use the green open to work banner. You end up meeting with a hiring manager who would be bothered by it. You're going to have to tell them at some point that you're not currently unemployed, that you're not currently employed. So all you're doing by using the green open to work banner in that theoretical scenario is moving that bias up the value chain. If someone has that ridiculous bias, you're never going to be able to change their opinion. So why does it matter? The logic of it doesn't make any sense to me.
And I think one of the other, if there are themes, one of the many themes that I think comes through like these conversations is always look at the persona and what the person has, to gain from spinning that narrative around their job search. It's because, as you pointed out, it's because they gain something from that friction of the open to work banner not being used for one reason or another, or they're trying to sell some sort of product. There's even, and we'll have our own things that we're looking to get from this narrative as well. So make sure that you're aware of like what people are looking to bring to the game and what their incentives are, to be able to kind of talk through that, to offer that perspective and come at it with that in mind and look at it through those glasses, because it's so important, especially when there's so much misinformation out there. It's important to kind of have a clean focus. Awesome. Thank you, James, so much for that, for your insights and your answers there. I mean, it's such an honor to be able to answer these questions, I think, and to hear from our audience and to have their input and feedback. Like, this is as much yours as it is ours. And so, please continue to write in. The email address for us is opentoworkpod@gmail.com. And every single time you write in, we're going to try and do these questions response episodes every couple of weeks. And they're fueled by what is on your mind. So write in and send us your thoughts.
Yeah, we definitely want to hear from you. We really enjoy answering your questions. It's not like we're always going to say it depends, but it does depend. So the more context...
we'll call this segment that It Depends with Matt and James.
Yeah, it does depend. So the more context you can give us, the more specific we can be in our answers. And I think what we will try and do going forward is we'll give a European answer or an EU answer, and we'll give a US answer, because it really does depend between those two major geos.
Yeah, and all we can speak to is our experience as well. So we'll know more about certain states and certain countries and geos than we will about others. So we will try and always answer the best. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone who's listened so far, for everyone listening to this. As we've said many times, our mission is to help you get your next job and help you navigate this really challenging kind of job market through our experience and knowledge as experienced recruiters. So every single time this is shared and listened to, we know that it's helping one person. These questions really fuel us and make us remind us why we're doing what we're doing. So thank you so much to everyone out there, and please remember to like and subscribe and send us your thoughts.